One of the hardest things that I had to deal with as a young Christian was the whole idea of the theory of evolution. And essentially, science view that everything came to be, whether it's in the world, whether it's in the animal world, whether it's the stars, the formation of the earth, everything was formed through some incredible cosmic lottery where we just happened to get lucky and all life came into being. And all this universe, everything in it, whether it's the life, the minerals, the everything that we can see, feel, touch, and experience in our lives, all happened because of some cosmic accident. And that was a big problem for me because as a young man back in my teenage years, I didn't have a real understanding of science. How does it work and all those kinds of things. So I'm just here to give you the scientific view of how this world came into being, because there are scientists who have gone and found out that, hey, this theory of evolution is actually not true. Some of the basics that I have to get through to everybody is, in science, there are different levels of understanding. So at the lowest level of understanding, they have things like hypothesis, which is just an idea that scientists come up with and say, I think maybe this is true. And then, of course, they go and they test the hypothesis through experimentation and or finding evidence in the natural world. Once they have enough evidence, they come up with a theory. So the theory gets put out, and if enough people actually test this theory over and over again in multiple different areas, it can eventually graduate up into becoming a law. So the fundamental concept I just want you to have to understand that evolution is a theory. Now the problem is that there are certain aspects, and just in case you don't understand how the theory of evolution works, the idea behind evolution is that everything that we see is basically caused by an accident. And over time, what has happened is base materials, inorganic materials, accidentally happen to form living material. And living material, or small cells, through a process called survival of the fittest and perhaps mutation or things of that sort, they changed over time because as they became more complex and able to form, instead of just single cells, it became multi-cells. Multicellular organisms became organ systems in larger organisms to create animal life, plant life, bird life, fish, everything. So that's the whole idea behind evolution. Some of the key pieces that you have to keep in mind is this happened over a very, very long period of time, and lots of accidents happened along the way to create us. Intelligent design, you could say it's the Christian viewpoint, basically says that, hey, there's a all-powerful or more powerful intelligent being that designed everything. Some of the key things that folks in this particular camp say is that, hey, the theory of evolution breaks a law. So there's a law of thermodynamics, you could call it the law of chaos or entropy, that entropy always has to increase, meaning the general scheme of things, all else being more or less equal, entropy, or basically things don't get better. They don't get more complicated over time. It actually breaks down into simpler things over time. But I'm going to get more into that in the next slide. But I just wanted to point out one quick thing for those of you who are interested in where to get additional information about the science behind intelligent design. There are a bunch of scientists that got together. They put together a lot of different information, and it all got sort of condensed into one location where you can find, it's called the Evolution Cruncher. I've given, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the website where you can link to it. It's a free download. You can download this, read this at your leisure. And I will say that when it comes to just about everything, with the exception of the formation of stars and things like that, this is the resource to use to understand how evolution works, or rather how intelligent design works and how evolution is incorrect. That all being said, just keep in mind that a theory is less than a law. A law always trumps the theory. So let's move on to our next slide. So, and I'm just going to give you just some brief snippets of things, and I'll be very honest, the Evolution Cruncher is a very, very scientific kind of book. And for those of you with any sort of science background, it's going to be a great read. For a lot of you who don't have a science background, it's kind of dry, not going to lie. But hey, science is kind of like that. So, just to give you a couple of brief snippets of things that I kind of just pulled out and kind of understood. One of the key pieces that I found was from Robert Gentry. So this is a fellow quite a few years ago. I believe it was like in the 1940s or something, but don't quote me on that. Feel free to look him up on Google to get the real lowdown scoop on this guy. But basically, his work, he decided was when he was working on his doctorate thesis, he wanted to work on understanding radio halos in granite. So what is a radio halo? Basically, when granite was formed, small amounts of radioactive material got trapped inside the granite while the granite was being formed. So the thing with radiation causes damage. It not only causes damage to like human beings, like, you don't want to get too close to radioactive things because it messes up your cells and makes you sick and stuff like that. But radiation also damages stone. So if you take a piece of granite and you cut it open, you will find, and in granite all over the world, there's millions and millions of these little radio halos, because as that radioactive material decays, it emits radiation, and it actually changes the molecular structure of the granite, so that when you look at it, it looks like there's these little circles in the granite. And I do invite you to go ahead and try to Google this yourself. You could get a look at what these halos look like in granite. I don't happen to have those pictures with me right now, but do go ahead and do that. So the issue that he had was he found that different kinds of radioactive material will leave different size and different kind of the characteristics of the halo will be different. So if it's a more powerful radioactive emitting substance, it will create a larger halo. If it's a less powerful radioactive emitting substance, it will create a smaller halo. I mean, that's a very, shall we say, layman's way of looking at it, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm just a student of science, so this is going to be very, very basic. So basic understanding, different materials will give out different kinds of halos. So Robert Gentry was able to identify some of these halos to be originally caused by a material called polonium-218. Now this particular material has a very, very short half-life. What that means is the amount of time for half of it to decay into its decay product is very, very short. It's only a couple of minutes. So because of that, because the size of the halo, he identified that the original material is polonium-218, because that's what causes that kind of a distance of a halo, that sort of thing. He also determined that the half-life of polonium-218 was so short that the granite had to form around the polonium within 3 minutes. If it was longer than 3 minutes, the polonium would have already decayed away so that the halo would never form. Of course, it could have been formed in a shorter time than 3 minutes, so that wouldn't have been a problem, but it had to have been formed within 3 minutes. Otherwise, the halo would not form, you would not be able to see it. And this flies in the face of evolution that says, hey, the whole Earth originally was this big ball of gas, and for millions of years, it cooled off eventually, and it solidified into into the Earth that we know it, that we see now, and that we can feel now and walk on and see. So basically, all the granite in the world had to have been formed within 3 minutes. As a small side note, just for those of you who are interested, do read a little more into this, just because of all of the things that Robert Gentry had to do in order to actually do these particular experiments and do his research. Because there were a lot of people, his own PhD advisor was telling him, don't do this. This is not a good theory to work on. Work on something else. But Robert Gentry was a pretty hard-headed man, little stubborn there, and he decided to do it anyway. I thought that was very interesting. If anybody's interested in going into a profession that is in the scientific realm, you may want to read more about that to give you an idea what science is like, what the established scientific world is like. Anyway, so moving on from Robert Gentry, there's the evolutionary view of the formation of the first cell. And I'm not going to go into too much depth of this, but there's a problem in that the formation of a cell from existing inorganic materials and other organic materials, it violates the second law of thermodynamics. What that boils down to is simple molecules do not form more complex ones. And I know if any of you thought back and you saw an experiment where they took in a big glass ball, they put all the chemicals that they thought was in existence in the primordial soup, or whatever that they called it, and they zapped it with some electricity, and they found that, hey, the soup started to form like DNA and stuff and things like that. And they said, oh, wow, this is great proof that evolution exists. Slight problem for those of you who know chemistry, organic chemistry and things like that. All these reactions go both ways, meaning at the moment I zap it with the electricity, it forms all these wonderful, here comes some precursors of it forms some RNA and stuff like that. That's great, but you take away the electricity, and if you just leave that RNA molecule sitting in that jar, it's going to break down into its original components. So in order for them to find these things, they had to create a kind of trap that would remove the RNA and all those nice molecules that they're trying to show, remove them from the actual reaction chamber so that it doesn't break down back into its original stuff. Now, for those of you who are totally kind of lost with this science stuff because it seems very complicated, I'm going to basically break it down to this. Evolution can work, and the idea, if you see that when a tornado hits a forest, you have to see that after the tornado hits and leaves, what's left behind are two completed houses next to each other. Now, why do I bring that up? It's real simple, because in evolution, they're saying it all happened by accident, but guess what? A lot of animal life is male and female. So it can't just happen once. It has to happen twice. And they have to be near each other, because guess what? It's really hard for a male and female to come together and have children if they're separated by thousands of miles and can never get to each other. So whatever accident that did happen, assuming the evolutionary view is true, whatever accident happened, it had to happen twice. Once is not good enough. It has to be twice. Because guess what? Dogs and cats can't get together to create more dogs and cats. It doesn't work. They don't have children. It doesn't work like that. And if they're not really quite the same species, there are a few of these hybrid species like mules. Guess what? They're all sterile. Can't have any kids. No children coming from a mule. Anyway, and again, I'm going to say that you go to that Evolution Cruncher, go to that website, you can download it, you can take your time and pick your way through it and be able to get a lot more information on this directly from the scientific view. And in essence, what it boils down to is, if you find that there are scientific experiments that disprove the theory, the rules of science say that theory should be thrown out. And the mere fact that it has not yet been thrown out makes me wonder what's going on. But that's a topic for another video.